Hello. It's a pleasure to be able to answer some questions submitted directly from the Greek WoW community. Ian, you have Greek ancestry. How has your Greek heritage affected you in your work on World of Warcraft? How often do you visit your yaya in Athens? And when will we have the chance to get some of her recipes as a food buff in WoW? My father is Greek. Listening to his bedtime stories definitely inspired my passion for fantasy worlds that in some ways led me to play World of Warcraft and led me to work on World of Warcraft. Growing up, I had the great fortune of being able to go to Greece many summers to visit family, my yaya in Athens, and we had a small house on Syros where we would often go and spend the summers. As far as food goes, you never know. For now, nothing specific to announce. With the introduction and continuous development of the Mythic Plus system, it seems that there isn't a lot of interest in joining a guild and raiding Heroic or Mythic anymore, which leads to the disbanding of guilds. Mythic Plus dungeons are great, but are there any plans to give some new incentives for people to enter or create new guilds and raid as a group, like guild halls with unique rewards or other bonuses to be gained? With the removal of class set pieces that used to be uniquely available from raids, we're aware that that's a problem that I think we need to solve, and we're going to be looking forward over the course of the rest of Battle for Azeroth and beyond to make sure that there are still some unique benefits and rewards for going into raiding. Going into Battle for Azeroth, there's a big change in Mythic Plus. Gear swapping is not allowed anymore. What are the thoughts behind this change? Gear swap in Mythic Plus has been a huge factor in BFA, and many times it would determine if you end up timing the key or not. For example, healers swapping gear for specific pulls or to do more damage. Some of the choices are most interesting when you're weighing the entire range of situations the dungeon's going to offer. If you're just speccing or just gearing for a specific boss or a specific pull of trash in the dungeon, oftentimes those can become really easy choices to make, actually. I think there's more high-level decision-making depth in a world where you make that choice once up front. The three PvP characteristics are burst, mobility, and CC. How should they be balanced in a spec, and which class is tougher to balance while preserving its unique characteristics? I'm not an expert these days on the nuances of PvP balance when it comes to individual specs, so I can't really say which is harder or easier to balance. I think weakness in one area should be made up for by strength in another. And so I think we're always looking for each spec to have a unique combination of these strengths and weaknesses. For the most part, we'd rather focus on increasing strengths than mitigating weaknesses. The alternative leads to a state where everyone is kind of average at everything. What are your plans on future stat squishes? Have you considered working on a new system, since stat squish is more like a temporary solution? We don't think we're going to need to do another squish for at least another expansion. Again, this is just to keep numbers from spiraling out of control. When we have numbers that are in the millions or even tens of millions, we're just dealing with very, very large numbers that are hard to grasp and compare without getting any gameplay benefit out of it. We know this isn't super elegant, but for now I think we feel pretty good about how the squishes have played out. Why did some of the classic raid buffs like Mark of the Wild or Blessing of Kings not make a comeback when Arcane Intellect and Fortitude did? There's something nice and ceremonial about, all right, let's get buffed up before we pull this boss. But it also gave a couple of classes that could use some extra utility, some value to their presence, an extra reason to be brought. Paladins and Druids already have plenty of utility. There isn't really a problem to solve there. Loot has always been a major factor in WoW. It could be a reward or a breaking point for a player or a guild. Over the years, there have been many changes to how loot works and drops. In recent expansions, we have the Warforged Titanforge systems that can be extremely rewarding in some cases and disappointing in others. You decided to keep the system in Battle for Azeroth, and in addition to the personal loot that you're going to apply to all modes, that means someone who wants to min-max a character will have to grind all modes every week with the hope of looting a Titanforge upgrade. Have you considered a cap applied to the loot that drops in lower difficulties? So we've decided to move away from a space where you just can kill a boss or run some content week after week after week and never see the item you want. Drop rates are higher across the board. There's personal loot. We have tradability, which gives you another chance at the item. We added bonus rolls in Mist of Pandaria, which give you a third chance at the item. And so we expect players to get things that they want out of a raid zone within, a couple of months at least of doing the tiers. And so Warforging and Titanforging keep some level of interest and potential for growth in those repeated clears. You're probably much better off doing some high mythic keys with your spare time versus going back and doing lower raid difficulties, hoping for a 1% chance of something amazing to happen that probably won't happen. Next question. So we have another loot question. TLDR, personal loot, why are you doing it? Any plans to change it? Overall, we're happy with how personal loot is working out so far. First off, on the lower end of the organization spectrum, there's a lot of guilds that churn through a steady stream of trials. And if you're looking to find a guild in WoW, you often are applying, you're trialing in a place for a few weeks. Your experience as a player just trying to get into raiding in World of Warcraft could very typically be going to a guild and you got literally nothing, you move on to another guild, the same cycle would continue. On the other end of the spectrum, on the very, very, very high end, we've seen in the past top guilds running multiple raid groups in parallel with 4 or 5 alts and funneling gear in the first weeks to a handful of specific mains using Master Loot. This effectively quadrupled or quintupled the rate at which they could gear up their raid compared to a regular group that did none of this. It made it very difficult for us to balance encounters, to provide a challenge for method during the first week or other comparable guilds, while still being a fun and satisfying progression experience for the majority of Mythic guilds in weeks to follow. Finally, when Master Loot was an option, we still had to design loot tables and design what items we put in the game around the possibility of Master Loot. We had to assume that, well, this thing could drop no matter who's in your raid. Moving to World of Personal Loot, we can actually better cater to a wider range of itemization. You'll see more fist weapons, you'll see more shields, you'll see more ranged weapons, and more, because it doesn't matter if an item is only useful for one specialization out of 36. When we know that that item will only ever drop for that one specialization when they're present, we can do a lot more and take more chances there. Now, for tight-knit social groups that weren't abusing any of this, there's something that we lost here. And I'm not denying that. There is something that we lost here for those groups. But we feel like the change for the majority of players for the game as a whole is a step in the right direction. And once you get past the first few weeks of a new raid tier, loot tradability is something that helps with a lot of those problems. If you're trying to gear up somebody who came back to the game or who switched mains, the rest of your raid can still pretty quickly funnel loot to them. Now, this breaks down a little bit where item level upgrades end up not being true upgrades for you, and you get something that you don't want to wear, but you also can't trade. That's a symptom of a larger problem where we're trying to, where possible, make item level a better guide for what's actually better. Any change for solo queue, any chance for solo queue in arenas or ranking systems for Battlegrounds? Battlegrounds seems boring right now with no reward. Also, always matching with players of low skill or players that lack the necessary drive to win makes things worse. It would be awesome if we could see a comeback of tiers or ranks that would make players work up a sweat, and also transmogs like Grand Marshals that would give people reason to actually focus on winning. We're not looking to make random battlegrounds and skirmishes a hardcore competitive environment. Those have always been for more casual players. Solo queuing is not something that we think is a great fit for World of Warcraft. In order to have good matchmaking in terms of reasonable queue times, matching you with people around your skill level and rating, and making reasonable compositions and that are matched up against other reasonable compositions, we don't think that that's possible to achieve without very, very, very long queue times or wild mismatches in skill, or this isn't going to work synergistically. We're instead focused on improving the social tools in the game, the pre-made group finder, adding communities to make it easier for people to join groups of like-minded folks who are looking to find matches or partners at a given rating. The flex mode was added to WoW with the aim to facilitate easier raid groups. Other than in Mythic, every other raid difficulty supports flex groups, which means it's easier than ever to make truly competitive groups for every circumstance. I believe that the raid difficulty system could be tweaked, merging LFR and normal with the other difficulty levels remaining as they are. This way, we can avoid unneeded content repetition and narrow down the level gap so that stat squishes aren't needed as often as they are today. What are the chances of something like this happening? We think the number of difficulties that we've settled on is actually the right fit for World of Warcraft. Normal is for a mix of friends and family groups and pickup groups. They're literally just playing with their friends. They're not going to recruit people for being better players. They're not going to kick people out. They're just going to say, hey, try to do better next time, and keep working at it, and that's a progression that they enjoy. Raid Finder is for people who don't want to commit to a schedule or find a large group. It's, you have some free time in the evening, you have an hour in the morning before you head to work, you can jump in, you can check out the end of the story, you can finish a quest. It's right there, it's a more bite-sized chunk. It's not meant to be this lasting, enduring social experience. And so those are two different purposes, two different audiences, and we don't think it's possible to merge those two into one single experience. Now, I think also, just another aspect of this question, we've tried to set up the incentives so that guilds feel like, and groups feel like they can focus on, at most, 2 difficulties. If we assume that you're doing 2 tiers, basically, if you have Mythic gear right now, you're going to go into Heroic next difficulty. So, in order for Heroic of next tier to beat Mythic of this tier, we need a gap in item level of at least like 25 or 30. That's what we've settled on, and we feel like that's worked pretty well. During Legion, we saw long quest lines for the first time, quests that unlock new recipes for our professions, and those quest lines were engaging and fun experiences. On the other hand, some recipes like alchemy flasks had a different system that required the player to craft a ton of them, hoping they'll get a proc for a rank 3 recipe. A player with a rank 2 recipe and someone with an early super lucky rank 3 means hundreds of thousands of gold difference in earnings. A system such as this one, based on luck, is flawed as it has a negative impact to the economy of the server and the overall gameplay experience. What will your approach be on this issue? Will we see a different solution than the random proc system, maybe a system similar to Legendary's progressive drop rates? With every expansion, I would say, throughout WoW's history, we've taken a slightly different approach to professions. A world where everyone can steadily progress towards making everything actually harms crafters' ability to get an economic advantage. It turns all crafters into basically the same thing. A route we're more likely to take is actually having enough variety in the meaningful recipes such that you can make your money by selling and crafting that one at a market advantage, while a different alchemist has their flask or their thing they can make. I think it's an area where we can do a lot better. We'd like to do more in terms of giving players opportunity to really feel like their identity can be one of a crafter, where I am a blacksmith, I am an alchemist, I spend tons of time and effort being better at this, and that has economic advantages, that maybe even has some power advantages. We're not quite there yet, we know, but that's something we want to work towards. Thank you for all of the great questions. It's a pleasure to be able to speak directly to the Greek WoW community.